Hey friends, anti-ICE agitators took their tactics to a new low this week as they interrupted a worship service with their chants and their threats and everything else, traumatizing a congregation who was there to worship the Lord. The question we want to get in today is, what is social justice? Is there such a thing? And how is that different than biblical justice? It's a really, really important distinction. And what is the First Amendment right to free speech? And how does that differ from what we're seeing with just a complete disruption, including violence in the streets, damaging of personal property? Is that all covered under the First Amendment? We're going to talk about some of these things on our podcast today.
Welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast. It's a little somber mood today.
Hold on, I'm going to try to get my composure to be able to speak. Matthew and I are in such despair. We're trying to overcome what happened last night. No, actually, neither one of us are in despair because we are prisoners of hope.
There you go.
We have at the beginning of this year, did we ever think that we would be watching a playoff game? It was so funny. You know, yesterday we had our starting point, and I was so grateful that the Bears game started at 5:30 because Marion said, who was it that scheduled the starting point on the same time as the Bears game? And I said, "Hun, nobody expects the Bears
we scheduled this 6 months ago."
But anyway, what a great year. We've been talking. The only reason we're bringing it up now is because we have been obviously leading up with our passion for all things Chicago Bears. But great season. They certainly outdid my expectations, and I think everybody in Chicago's. And it's a bright future. So that's a rare thing to say about Chicago's sports team in the last 2 decades. It's a bright future, but it is a bright future. So
yeah, you guys actually have a quarterback now.
We do, yeah. And that play, we were just being wowed by it. The 4th and 4 or whatever it was, the final, like make or break play of the game, right? And he does something that I don't know that I've seen too many quarterbacks do, race about 20 yards the opposite direction and then make enough space between 2 defenders to throw the ball about 50 or 60 yards in the air for a touchdown with no time left on the clock. I mean, that right there is a memory I think every Chicago football fan will hold forever. Yeah. Unbelievable. It's also Martin Luther King Day today, and we honor the contributions and the powerful prophetic leadership and prophetic voice that he had for the civil rights movement and all that was accomplished through that. And really the reason I bring him up today is because we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between biblical justice and this newfangled concept called social justice. And I would like to suggest that social justice is neither. It's not justice and it's not very social. And maybe a good place to start is just the absolute mayhem that is happening in Minnesota. I saw a funny map that somebody proposed where we adopted part of Canada for the United States and we got rid of Minnesota altogether. I thought that might not be a bad thing because when you're looking at the absolute wacko leadership that state has in terms of Tim Walz, we've already talked about him, but the mayor is just a progressive leftist wacko as well, and they're really creating a hotbed of chaos in that state, on top of the fact that they've already robbed taxpayers of gazillions of dollars, and we still haven't got to the bottom of that corruption, the depth of that. But I wanted to start off, before we get into the latest debacle with the invasion of a church while people are worshiping, I wanted to read this quote from Stephen Miller. I really like Stephen Miller. Every time the guy opens his mouth, I just find myself leaning in because he just cuts through all the garbage and just lays out the truth in such a clear way. And this is what he had to say. Ask yourself, why would Fry and Walz sanction such egregious violence against ICE? Because they understand this mass migration scheme is the heart of the Democrat Party's political power. It's existential for them. They know that if this administration, if President Trump is successful in reversing this invasion, it will deal a generational blow to the Democrat political power. It is their plan for power today and long into the future. I think that says a lot about why you would not have an elected officials actually supporting law enforcement and supporting our federal immigration, folks that are out there, our ICE agents that are out there. And we've talked about this in the past. That not only was this Somali daycare situation a shell game for Democrats, it brought in a base that they give all these special rights to. It creates a slush fund because the Democrats, in turning their heads the other way, end up getting campaign contributions. And again, we're talking about this. We talk about systemic injustice. That's a big term on the left. Well, this is systemic injustice because this has been going on in the system for about 10 years, and it makes sense that they would be fighting so hard because this is the foundation of their future. This is their voting base, letting illegal people invade this country. And I like that term invasion. That's an important word because we're talking about, 18, 20 million people invaded this country with no vetting. Were subsidized by the Democratic Party with taxpayer dollars, allowed all kinds of fraud to occur. And now that we actually have an administration that's going after that corruption, we're seeing them saying all kinds of inflammatory things that create and encourage violence, as well as telling the police to stand down. There's no police to be found anywhere in these riots and things that are happening on the streets and all the mayhem that they're just turning their heads and allowing it to happen, all in the name of social justice. So, what's your take? You think Stephen Miller is accurate here? Are we exposing a generational power play and a generational blow to the Democrats' power base? Is that why we see so much, quote, protesting from liberal cities? Because we're actually going after their base.
Logic dictates because these ICE are enforcing the law of the land, federal laws.
Yeah.
These aren't things that they're just making up. So why would an elected representative fight so hard against enforcement of existing laws, right? It would be like the IRS working really hard or being prevented from collecting taxes, or be police officers being prevented from giving speeding tickets when people are driving too far. And there's certain pushback, but this level of pushback does ask the question, like, what is the in other words, are they just they feel so morally strong? This is such a moral issue of letting illegal immigrants come in. It's such a generational moral issue of life and death. Or is there some ulterior incentives to them having illegals come into our nation? And that's what I think Stephen Miller is making his point that, hey, these guys are not true believers of illegal immigrations. There's some underlining things behind it. Now, my question for you, however, is, from their perspective, this is social justice. Allowing people from other nations come in without going through the legal process. Maybe the argument is that the legal process is too arduous. It takes too long, too expensive, whatever that process is.
And I'll let you finish, but
yeah.
Okay, so when you let 20 million people come in illegally, it's going to be a really long and arduous process and messy process to try to remove them. In fact, I think the reason they're creating such chaos everywhere is because they know that if they make this almost impossible, if they do everything they can to stop it, and notice how they're trying to coach all of this too in biblical virtuous morality, type language. They're trying to call this, these are my neighbors, all this kind of stuff. When we know the Democrats let these folks in. They're unvetted. They're making all of us get shots, and we got to do all kinds of crazy stuff. Still to this day, I'm writing letters for nurses who are being harassed because they won't get a flu shot. This all was happening to us as citizens while we're working our tail ends off, double jobs and all this kind of stuff, trying to raise our kids. And we're giving all these free benefits out to people who aren't even citizens. And then to add insult to injury, to actually let a non-citizen vote in our country is a complete slap in the face to American citizens. I mean, this would happen nowhere else in the world. I name one other place where I could sneak into a country illegally and be given educational benefits, housing benefits, child care benefits, food stamps, education, free education, all of this stuff, while the average American citizen is working really hard just to get by and pay bills. I mean, it's time for outrage from American citizens. I think most of us are there. I don't believe the news reports that all of a sudden, all of us Trump supporters are having buyer's remorse, right? That somehow we feel badly that we voted for Trump. Just the opposite. Thank God some administration is finally pushing back and saying enough is enough. We can't treat the American people this way. And so that's my take, on it, is I think people should be really ticked. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I just read something that said a lot of our veterans are signing up for ICE, like to the tune of 100,000 of them, because they're so sick and tired of what they're seeing. The lawlessness is happening, in these urban areas. So I think that, I believe that is the impulse behind this. This is totally messing up their voting base and their future and their plans to stay in power. And we talked about this when you do not have a lord bigger than government. A government is your lord and your king. You'll do anything to stay in power. I mean, including violence, and unfortunately, that's becoming more and more. I'm a little concerned. We're in winter now. I mean, most folks don't want to get out in the wintertime and hang out and cause all kinds of trouble because it's so picking cold up in Minnesota. I hope this gets resolved before the warmer months come, or we're going to have a revisitation, perhaps, of some of the. We already saw Minneapolis burning to the ground because of Walz's leadership. So it's going to be interesting to see how they get a grip on this. But I think most folks that are law-abiding citizens are saying, please get a grip on this, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of vigilanteism that unfortunately will unfold, because people will just try protecting their own selves, and people get hurt when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's back in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Summer of love, a lot of burning, right? And of course, that was a big presidential election that year. And disruption and chaos is not good for the incumbent. And it might be a replay because it's midterm year.
Well, and I just want to say this. People say, hey, we're Americans, First Amendment, free speech. Burning someone's private property to the ground is not free speech. Yeah. Blocking highways is not free speech. You don't have the right to impede other people's rights. You don't have the right to come on private property like we just saw with these protesters led by Don Lemon, the disgraced CNN anchor. When CNN fires you, you must be doing a really, really terrible job, because they all do terrible jobs at CNN. But when you get fired for that, you must be at the bottom of the barrel. So there you got Don Lemon, who just conveniently shows up in this Baptist church. They interrupt the entire worship service. And Lemon's calling this, hey, this is just free speech. This is just the right to protest. No, that's private property. You don't have the right to go in and disrupt the worship service and start yelling and screaming and doing all the things that you're doing. That's not free speech. That is breaking the law. And I hear the Justice Department is going to go after them and make a statement, as they should, because here's what I think the left understands: who are the people that are for biblical justice, not social justice, but biblical justice? It's the Christians. It's the church. We understand that there's got to be fair treatment, equal rights under the law. The key word here is law, right? It amazes me that Democrats, and I watched the CNN, with who's our guy on there, the one conservative that always...
Oh, Scott Jennings.
I love that guy, man. He just sits there waiting, and then just speaks the truth. But he keeps reminding people, like, all these innocent people are being mixed in with the rapists and murderers and gang members and all this kind of stuff, all these innocent people. And he's like, wait a minute, everybody that's being arrested is illegally in the country, and Democrats will not concede on that point. Somehow it's okay if you're illegally here, if you're not raping, pillaging, murdering, and running a Somali daycare, then it's okay to be here. But it's like, no, you're here illegally. Everybody that they round up is illegal. Everybody that they round up is breaking the law. Now they're rounding up a lot of really dangerous people, but that doesn't erase the distinction in the language again, which is so important. They're going after people in this country illegally, and justice says, yeah, they shouldn't be able to cut to the front of the line. We got people that are trying to enter this country the right way. And why in the world should we allow people to circumvent that process and come in with no vetting, no proper protocol, and somehow that's okay because they've been here and they're my neighbor and I'm supposed to love my neighbor. And again, it's an absolute twisting of biblical justice and biblical ethics, with this social justice mess that really isn't justice at all. It's like I shared in the sermon on Sunday, well, I'm not a traditional Christian, what does that mean? You're not a traditional Christian. There's only one kind of Christian, and we don't put adjectives in front. It's the same thing with justice. There is justice, and then everything else is a counterfeit. And so social justice is neither. It's not justice, and it's not social. It's not about being good to your neighbor at all. It's actually about circumventing your neighbor's rights and trampling your neighbor's rights in the name of whatever your system of justice is. So, again, I think the crossing of the line in the church is going to awaken a lot of people. I think it's going to awaken a sleeping church, I hope. I hope no one tries that at Living Stones, because it would be very messy.
Right.
Yeah, and it should be, because people are going to say, look, if you're going to allow this to happen, and I don't think it would happen, I think in Crown Point, I think it would be police support and other things, but in these big urban areas, and you're trying to pastor a church, and you got this going on, trying to intimidate people, freak out kids, and you saw people, terrified about what was going to happen, as they should be. So anyway, I think sometimes people just cross the line a little bit too far, and I'm hoping that is, the crossing of the line that awakens a sleeping church, across America. So anyway, enough of a speech there.
Yeah, I think you touched on the major difference between justice and social justice. The word social justice is, when you add like the word social in front of justice, it's kind of like there are different types of justice. Well, that itself it's a scary slope to go to somewhere else. It means that justice is defined by different people and different perspective. Your justice is different from my justice. No, that itself it's a scary place to be, right?
So social justice finds its source in human beings, in man, not in God. When you think about the biblical concept of justice, it comes from who God is. God is a God of righteousness and justice. His throne is righteousness and truth and justice. So, God is the standard. He is the source. He is the plumb line. And then human justice lines itself up with God and his character. When you throw God out of the mix, which is where these social justice warriors, then you incorporate a whole bunch of crazy philosophical templates. So we got CRT, and we had the BLM movement, and we have DEI, and we have all these other things. So even these people in the church are screaming this lady's name, who was a lawbreaker. And from God's standard of justice, she violated delegated authority. She was out doing things that she shouldn't have been doing. She should have listened. She should have honored. She should respect the rule of law. And yet they're coming into a Baptist church yelling this poor woman's name as if she's a victim. So when you don't have God's standard of justice, you don't know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And in this situation, they feel, like they got the moral high ground because this woman was murdered by ICE agents when she wasn't, as we talked about last week, she wasn't murdered at all. She was actually trying to harm those who are there legally and who are enforcing the law, the rule of law. She's acting in a very seditious manner, and unfortunately, she was killed. But again, like if you don't have an absolute standard of justice, you don't know who the good people are and who the bad people are, who to support, who not to support. Social justice, interesting enough, emphasizes systems and institutions and structural change to create equitable social outcomes. And so this is a big worldview distinction, you know. We believe that the problem in life and in culture is internal. It's sin. Sin causes people to act selfishly. Sin creates injustice. Sin is the root of racism and all these things. But people who are on the other side, the social justice folks, they think the system is what's the problem. It's the unjust systems and structure. That's why we hear this term systemic racism. In other words, it's built-in racism. And again, we would say, no, that's false. We have to deal with the human heart, not with supposed, bias structures or whatever. And so these are huge differences. The problem is not outside of us. The problem is actually inside of us. And that's the difference, again, between a humanistic understanding of justice and a biblical understanding of justice. So, a few other points here that I think are important to hit. New Testament justice is Christ-centered. In other words, Jesus embodies and fulfills all justice. He is the human embodiment of justice. Is heart transforming. True justice flows from a renewed heart and life in the Spirit. We talked about that this week. Until a person is converted, born again, their heart is changed, they'll never have a love for truth and justice, at least from a biblical standpoint. It's impartial and righteous. Favoritism and exploitation under a biblical form of justice are condemned. But there has to be a standard so that we know what favoritism is and what favoritism is not. Justice includes mercy and healing and forgiveness. Justice is community forming, and the church becomes a living example of Christ's just kingdom. And lastly, justice from a biblical standpoint is redemptive. It's rooted in the cross. It restores rather than merely punishes. And so when you look at what's happening in a lot of these situations, like burning down cities, beating people up, the disrespect, spitting in the faces of law officers, saying, F ICE and get the F out of our communities. And these are leaders talking that way. That's not the vision of biblical justice. That's not pulling us together. That's not healing. That's not restorative. That's just chaos. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing in a lot of places. So, again, very, very concerned, and I hope this is dealt with in a forceful and strong way.
I believe Trump has threatened the Insurrection Act in Minneapolis. Yep. This continues. But back to social justice, the sense I get from social justice is just a very key word to elevate one group of people over another. It's kind of like Animal Farm, right? Every animal's equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Yep.
It's using the verbiage of equality and justice, but the reality is elevating one caste over a different caste. I think about one thing that I've been reading quite a bit about is the proposed billionaire tax in California. I think it's a 5% tax. My understanding is on unrealized earnings or profits, which is crazy to me. When you're taxed on unrealized earnings or profits, these aren't cash flow you have.
So define unrealized. That means that this is money that is not actually in your hands.
In your hand. They're in the stock market. I mean, but you haven't sold it, or they're in your business. That it's just based on some type of evaluation, or your house is based on some evaluation. In other words, it's not liquid. So in order to give that money out, you have to liquidate, you have to take a loan, you have to, I don't understand exactly the details of it. But again, it's seen through the lens of social justice because there's something unjust about billionaires making billions. Therefore, you should, take that money and distribute to the poor, or distribute to everyone else, or distribute to cover their expenses. But one huge issue that we're overlooking is, what is California going to do with the money? What have they done in the money in the past? Are they using it for a good purpose?
Well, the money that they think they're going to get from these types of crazy, unjust, from a biblical standpoint, economic attacks on people who are producers, they're not going to get that money because these people are not stupid enough to stay.
Tons of people have already left. David Sachs left. Peter Thiel left. They already left California.
Yeah, and that's what these guys don't get. Everybody pay their fair share. The fair share means everybody. See, this is the difference between the word equity or equitable, which means we're going to force some type of evil footing. Like, you shouldn't have more than me, so I'm going to take from you and give it to me. So now we're on the same level. That's not a biblical concept at all. That is a communistic, socialistic kind of concept where the government thinks its job is to be a social justice warrior, right? And we're going to go around and we're going to, because somehow it's unjust for you to have more money than me when you might have sacrificed, gone to school, worked hard, saved, all these things that folks do to run businesses, and you're very familiar with that. And somebody who's sitting at home playing video games in their mom's basement feels like they're deserving of some of your money, or a what's that they call, like a livable wage, or an income that allows you to live, like it's the government's job to take care of you.
Universal basic income.
Yeah, universal basic income. So that we have these language like healthcare is a basic human right. At the same time, we say abortion is a basic human right. So it's just crazy and disjointed. But somehow that's their view of equality, economic equality, same level playing field. And we all know that doesn't work. And it rewards people who shouldn't be rewarded, and it punishes people who should be celebrated. And so all this stuff, I mean, here's what they do. Like, California is going to be, it already is a cesspool in so many ways. They're already in debt. They got all kinds of chaos, as we saw. And on top of that, what the Democrats do is they bankrupt their states, and then when they get power in Washington, D.C., they subsidize their failed policies. So Chicago does this all the time, right? They dig a massive hole, and the state of Illinois as a whole, they dig a massive hole, and then they wait to rig the system so they can get power in D.C. so that the D.C. folks will send money back to the state to help bail out the hole that they dug. This is why it's power at all costs, because when Trump and this administration has been cutting off the spigot, so to speak, on some of these leftist groups and so forth, this is their funding mechanism. And if they don't have power, the hole's going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I don't know what's going to happen with California if Gavin Newsom runs for president. I mean, are you kidding me? If you look at his state as a resume, what a joke. What an epic failure. And again, I don't see how these people win if the slush funds and the NGOs and the shell companies and everything that they set up to get money back to support their efforts, if all that stuff gets cut off and we actually require voter ID and how about voting, in person? Some of these other things that we've got to change to make the system clean. If we ever get back to that, they may never win another election until they at least change their song and dance, which has been rejected by the American people. So that's why I feel like there's such vitriol and such an aggressive approach to what this administration is doing, because I do believe it's a generational blow. To go back to Stephen Miller's words, I think this is putting an axe to the root of a well-designed system of fraud and corruption and illegal power that they've exploited for years and years and years. So anyway, very, very interesting what's happening over there.
Yeah, and one more blow of California to beat the Bears last night. So
okay, let's talk about this. Do you know that Matthew Stafford's salary is about $40-some million a year?
Okay.
After taxes, and they got a jock tax, they got all these taxes, he takes home less than half of that. Now, that's highway robbery.
Yeah, he was just still playing Detroit. I don't know what Detroit's tax rate is.
I don't know that Detroit's any better, but I'll tell you what, this is why, we were talking about will the Chicago Bears stadium be moved out of Chicago and built in Indiana. From a purely economic standpoint and from what the players would make and actually what they would keep, it's a no-brainer.
That's a real thing? They're going to build stadium?
Well, it's funny because some people say, there's no way. But they keep talking about it, and the problem is Illinois is so broke, they can't keep the most storied franchise in their city, especially after the year we just had. It would be a total disgrace for Illinois to screw this up. But they have a good shot of doing it because they've screwed up everything else. Yeah. But just from a financial standpoint, the benefits of moving a couple miles to the east are astronomical.
So it would be the Dyers, the Indiana Dyers.
They'd still be the Chicago Bears. Just like, we don't have the New Jersey Giants, but they are in New Jersey. There's other teams that are actually not in the state that they're named for.
Yeah.
So anyway, but this again is where it comes down to practicality, right? I mean, these are practical policies that either destroy your economic base or lead to great economic blessing. I think Indiana is the fourth best business climate, economic climate in the nation, which is pretty awesome. So when you look at that from a purely financial stability standpoint, we're like, hey, these guys could do really well here, and the players could do well, and they can make their money go a long way in Indiana. So we'll see. I want to, just by way of transitioning here a little bit, I want to compliment our public square ministry and Isaac and Barbara. We had about 175 people on a Friday night who were in the building. Had some great messages from some of our wonderful leaders here in Indiana. And the whole night was really just to encourage people to get involved and be a part of the process. So we can't curse the darkness if we're not being a part of lighting some candles. And that's what I think was happening on Friday night, was a lot of people being envisioned, equipped, trained to say, hey, go make a difference. And so I just want to give a shout out to Isaac and Barbara on that. Also, I want to say, this Worldview Day that we have coming up the first Saturday in February is very, very important. And I would encourage all of our podcast listeners to take that day and invest in your own education. We've got two amazing speakers coming in who are experts, policy experts from Family Research Council or associated with the Family Research Council. And we're going to be talking about a lot of things that we talk about on this program, like critical race theory and sanctity of life and, importance of a biblical worldview, transgender ideology, and all this kind of craziness. And it's going to be a really, really equipping time. So maybe that's a good transition. Transgender craziness. This was just made it to the highest courts. Something as simple as, should a male be able to compete in female sports? And it was interesting, Justice Brown, who still hasn't been able to define what a woman is. It's a disgrace that she's at the highest, court in the land, and she still can't provide a definition. Well, she can, but she won't because it goes against her progressive ideology. But she kept arguing that cis women do not have the same, or transgender women don't have the same rights as cis women. Let's talk a little bit about the language here. A cis woman is simply a straight, what they would call straight woman.
No, not straight. So you're confusing sexuality with gender identity. Sorry to correct your. You're obviously not a student of the. It just means that she's the biological woman who identifies as a biological. I'm not really using the verbiage, which makes me want to throw up.
So and this is important because we talk about this. We can't use the verbiage. So when people start saying a cis woman, we're like, excuse me, just drop the cis.
No, you mean woman.
Yeah, you mean a woman.
You mean
a man.
X-hormonal.
Yeah, it's not a transgender. It's not a transgender woman. It is a confused man who's pretending to be a woman, and she's still, used the wrong language and tried to make the wrong arguments and still would not simply agree to the simple explanation that males should not be competing against females. They are different. There's a distinct advantage. And, we don't have any females, by the way, wanting to compete with males. Maybe there's a biological reality here that we're failing to acknowledge. So, again, at the highest court of the land, the fact that we are arguing something that is so common sense shows us the state of moral darkness and confusion that America is in right now. I mean, it's laughable. Now, I think, what did you say? The looks like perhaps 6-3.
I was listening to the ADF's lead attorney, I think her name Kristen something, and her opinion is that we should win the 6-3. Now, who knows?
The fact that 3 justices, though, could be so ideologically blinded or compromised to not acknowledge what is so obvious.
Or probably 3 women justice, which is interesting in itself because if we're talking about cis and trans women, those 3 who were probably nominated partially at least because that they're women
and feminists
lose the meaning of being the woman itself and being nominated.
Yeah.
So the
three
irony
women
itself,
who can't define what a woman is and won't support women, the basic right of women to have safe places, bathrooms that are their own,
you
and play in
mentioned
women's sport.
Justice Brown, when she was asked about what is a woman, I think her answer was, "I'm not a biologist. I cannot answer it."
Yeah, that was when she was in the confirmation
phase. I just feel like that answer is very disingenuous because you can have the foremost biologist, different biologists come up, and they'll have different answers. So that's a very disingenuous answer because at the end of the day, she's saying, "Well, I'm not an expert in this." Really, the truth is, I don't want to answer that question because it's against my ideology to answer that question. Yep. And deferring to a biologist does not answer that question. It's not according to her, it's not a biological fact itself. So it's just disingenuous on all levels.
When you are a woman and you can't define what a woman is, and you've been a woman all your life, and you still don't know who you are or what you are,
and you live like a woman.
This is the thing. There's, we say when you have a broken worldview, it's incongruent. It has internal inconsistencies. It's irrational. So much of this progressivism nonsense is so irrational, so self-contradictory. From just, and it's interesting because even I'm talking about logic now. I'm talking about being able to pursue truth. All of these things are now considered racism. It is part of white privilege that we talk about logic, evidently. So we can't even have civil discussions about these things. But they're so, like I said, hypocritical that. You got, on the one hand, you got to have a woman who can't even define a woman, who won't protect women who want to have their own sports. And we fought for years that, women have the right to play, whatever sport that a man can play. And again, we can get into some discussions on that. But women have the right to equal pay. Women have the right, but we don't even know what a woman is anymore. And now we're going to let men be women and say that that's okay. The whole thing's a joke, but again, it shows you what happens when you reject God and you reject biblical standards for gender. And by the way, we're going to talk about that at the conference, a whole session on gender. So these are things we got to get schooled in, so that maybe someday we could be a Supreme Court justice. And then somebody will ask us, what's a woman? And we'll be able to give the right answer. Woohoo! Boy, talk about a low baseline.
In 8th grade biology that there's these things called chromosomes.
Lord help us. I had one other important thing we were going to talk about on this podcast before we wrap up.
More important than the Supreme Court?
Well, that I guess was probably the thing I was thinking about. But yeah, praise God for some sanity there as we move ahead. So, I know what I was going to say. So exciting. Back to the heart and soul of what we're about here, which is transformation. I'm amazed after 6 years, kind of the COVID revival that Living Stones experienced as we kept our doors open and just tried to love people and be the church and care for people's needs in the midst of a whole lot of crazy chaos and bad government and tyrannical government. But for the last 6 years, as we do Starting Point, I keep waiting for the numbers to abate. I keep waiting for a little slowdown. We had 100 people signed up for our Starting Point class. About 50 of them are ready to jump in and lock shields with us here and become part of the family. And I got to spend a lot of time walking around just talking to people. And it's amazing how many people said, you know what, our lives have been so transformed by Jesus since we have been here. And just giving these unsolicited testimonies of what God has done. That to me is so life-giving and so encouraging, as we serve here pastorally, to hear those kind of testimonies, kids being, transformed in the children's ministry or youth ministry, marriages being healed. People just, I've heard people say, how come I never heard of this before at our other church? Stuff like that. When you're just preaching the scripture and connecting the dots, and it's just, to me, it's just, those are always just a real affirming time. And whenever you can add, to the church family, people wanting to be a part of what God's doing here and partner with us, it's just very, very exciting. So, and I'm also excited, we come into the month of February. In fact, actually, we're starting a little early this month in January, but Pastor Jerry's up. Pastor Aaron will be up. You'll be up sharing. It's just going to be a really good month as we get to hear from the rest of our pastoral team. So you're one of my favorites. I love to hear you. I get to hear you every Monday here when we record, but I really love it when you dive into Scripture and the way you just lay out God's Word in such a clear way, but also I love the stories and the personal application. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be a parishioner this next month.
For the month of February.
I'm going to eat bagels. I'm going to drink coffee. I'm going to get to do stuff I never get to do. I'm going to run around and hug people. And then I'm going to hear some really, really, really good preaching. So as my father used to say, don't screw it up.
No pressure.
Yeah, no
but
pressure.
Don't screw it up.
No pressure, but don't screw it up. No, I know you won't. I'm excited for everybody. But anyway, glad you guys tune in. We so appreciate the comments. Keep them coming. We want to know how we can continue to make this the best podcast for your needs as possible. So have a great, great week. We'll look forward to being with you next Thursday.